The vibrant hum of downtown Atlanta pulsed through the air, a symphony of honking cars, hurried footsteps, and the rich scent of freshly brewed coffee spilling out from quaint cafes lining the streets. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement, illuminating the faces of pedestrians weaving through their daily routines. It was a scene of controlled chaos, a rhythm the city had perfected over time. But that fragile harmony shattered in an instant when Officer Mark Daniels stormed onto the stage, his presence a thunderclap in the bustling calm, his stern face, etched with lines of unyielding authority, twisted into a scowl as he dragged a handcuffed woman out of a department store, her wrists bound but her posture unbroken. Beneath her unzipped coat, the crisp lines of her uniform gleamed a silent testament to her rank, her identity. The crowd parted like a tide, eyes wide, breaths held, as Daniel's voice boomed over the murmurs. We caught her red-handed. The woman's head remained high, her gaze steady despite the cold metal biting into her skin. Around her, the air buzzed with whispers, a ripple of disbelief spreading through the onlookers. Phones emerged from pockets, their lenses capturing the raw intensity of the momentary jerk of Daniel's arm, every flash of defiance in the woman's eyes. "Wait," a voice broke through the hum, trembling with shock. "Isn't that Captain Harris?" The name hung in the air, heavy with recognition. Daniels sneered, his grip tightening as he yanked her forward, his words dripping with venom. "Yeah, she's a captain who thought she could swipe whatever she wanted and walk away clean. Captain Alina Harris, the first black woman to rise to such a rank in Atlanta's police force, met his glare with a steely resolve that cut deeper than any shout. Her jaw clenched, her voice emerged low and sharp, slicing through the tension like a blade. "This is a mistake, Daniels, and you damn well know it." Inside her chest, a storm brewed danger, yes, but also a piercing clarity. She knew this wasn't about evidence or justice. It was about him, his need to dominate, to diminish. Daniels smirked, his lips curling with a cruel satisfaction. "We'll see about that, won't we?" From the store's glass doors, the manager emerged, a weary man with a nervous tick in his hands as he fumbled with his tie. His voice wavered as he stepped forward, beads of sweat glistening on his brow. "Sir, tried to tell you, she didn't." Daniels wheeled on him, his glare a wall of fire that silenced the man mid-sentence. "I don't need your opinion, Johnson. I saw her with my own eyes." The manager shrank back, his shoulders slumping under the weight of Daniel's authority, though his eyes flickered with unspoken protest. He'd seen the truth, but fear tethered his tongue. The crowd's whispers swelled into a low roar, a mix of confusion and unease threading through their voices. Some craned their necks, questioning why Daniels bore down with such ferocity, while others stood frozen, too stunned to act. A younger officer, his badge still gleaming with the polish of inexperience, pushed through the throng, his face a canvas of worry and disbelief. "Mark, stop this," he pleaded, his voice cracking under the strain. "You can't treat her like this is one of us." Daniels didn't even glance his way. His focus locked on Harris as he hauled her toward his squad car. The rookie lingered, his hands twitching at his sides, torn between duty and the gnawing sense that something was terribly wrong. With a rough shove, Daniels forced Harris into the back seat, the door slamming shut with a hollow thud that echoed through the street. He leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear, his whisper a venomous hiss meant for her alone. "You think your shiny title means anything to me? You're just another crook in my book." Harris didn't flinch. Her eyes burned with a quiet, unyielding fury, a fire that spoke of resilience forged through years of battle, some fought with words, others with the weight of her very existence. She held his gaze until he pulled away, the smirk on his face faltering for a fraction of a second. A crack in his armor he quickly buried. The crowd erupted into a chaotic buzz as Daniels barked at the manager once more, warding off his timid approach. Just as he slid into the driver's seat, his radio crackled to life, the dispatcher's voice slicing through the static with an urgency that bordered on panic. "Officer Daniels, you're needed at HQ immediately. There's been a development." He paused, his fingers hovering over the receiver, a flicker of doubt crossing his mind. "I'm on my way," he snapped. His tone clipped as he cast a glance at Harris through the rearview mirror. Her silence unnerved him, her stillness a stark contrast to the storm brewing within him. Something felt off wrong, Evan, but he shoved the thought down, unwilling to entertain it. The drive to headquarters was a taut wire stretched to its breaking point. Harris stared out the window, the city blurring past in streaks of colored taillights. Golden storefronts, the gray haze of exhaust. Her mind churned, piecing together the events, the deliberate malice in Daniel's actions. She wasn't just a target, she was a symbol, and he'd chosen her to prove a point. Daniel's hands gripped the wheel, his knuckles whitening as his thoughts raced. He'd built his career on instinct, on the certainty of his own eyes. But now a shadow of uncertainty crept in, gnawing at the edges of his confidence. When they arrived, the station buzzed with a restless energy, officers clustering in tight knots. Their whispers a low hum that fell silent the moment Daniels strode in with Harris in tow. All eyes tracked them, some wide with shock, others narrowed with suspicion. "Daniels, in my office." Now, the chief's voice cut through the din, sharp and unyielding. A blade of authority that brooked no argument. Daniels hesitated, his bravado flickering, then tugged Harris along. Ignoring the stares boring into his back, the rookie officer watched from the sidelines, his brow furrowed, his fingers tapping nervously against his thigh. He'd heard rumors about Daniels' temper, his grudge, but this was something else entirely. Inside the office, the door clicked shut with a finality that made the air feel heavier. The chief loomed behind his desk, a towering figure whose presence filled the room. Though his face was pale, his eyes shadowed with a rare unease. "Mark, what the hell is going on?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Daniels crossed his arms, his chest puffing out in defiance, though a tremor of doubt quaked beneath his surface. "I caught her stealing, Chief. She was walking out with a pair of designer shoes, box and all. I saw it myself." The chief's eyes narrowed, his gaze piercing through Daniel's bluster. "You're sure about that?" "Of course I'm sure," Daniels fired back, his voice rising with indignation. "She was holding the damn box." The chief shook his head, his tone dropping to a fierce, MEASURED cadence. "Mark, the store has security cameras. We reviewed the footage. She didn't steal anything." Daniels blinked, the words hitting him like a punch to the gut, momentarily stealing his breath. "That's not possible," he muttered, his certainty crumbling. "You saw what you wanted to see," the chief cut in, his disappointment a tangible weight. "Captain Harris was there to pick up shoes she'd ordered weeks ago. She had the receipt in her pocket." Daniels opened his mouth to protest, but the chief silenced him with a raised hand. "It gets worse," he continued, his voice sinking lower. "The footage shows you brushing off the manager when he tried to explain. You dragged her out, humiliated her in front of a crowd, Mark. And for what? Your own bias." Daniel's face flushed a deep crimson, a mix of rage and shame boiling beneath his skin. "Chief, I am not finished," the chief snapped, pointing to the door. "Take those cuffs off her, now." Reluctantly, Daniels complied, his fingers fumbling with the key as he unlocked Harris' restraints. She rubbed her wrists, the red marks a silent accusation. But her silence spoke louder than any words. Her eyes locked onto his, a blend of pity and disdain that cut deeper than any insult. The chief sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose as though warding off a migraine. "Captain Harris, you're free to go. I'm deeply sorry for this gross misconduct." Harris nodded, her voice steady as steel. "I'll let my lawyer take it from here." With that, she turned and left, her footsteps echoing with purpose, leaving Daniels alone with the weight of his unraveling world. The silence that followed was suffocating. The chief's voice broke it, low and resolute. "Mark, I don't know what's gotten into you. This isn't the first time your behavior's raised flags." Daniels stared at the floor, his jaw tight, his mind a whirlwind of denial and dread. "You're suspended, effective immediately," the chief continued. "And don't think this is the end. There'll be a full investigation." Daniel's world tilted, the word suspended reverberating in his skull like a death knell. "Suspended," he echoed, his voice a hollow whisper. The chief nodded. "You crossed a line, Mark. Now you'll face the consequences." As Daniels stumbled out of the office, the station's hum resumed. But the eyes of his colleagues followed him, some with shock, others with a quiet satisfaction. that stung worse than scorn. The rookie lingered near the coffee machine, his gaze tracking Daniel's retreat, a mix of relief and unease settling in his chest. He'd always admired Daniel's tenacity, but now he saw the cost of that unchecked power. Outside, the cool Atlanta air hit Daniels like a slap, doing little to quench the fire of rage and humiliation blazing within him. He could already see the headlines: veteran officer suspended amid misconduct claims, each word a nail in the coffin of his career. He wouldn't let it end like this, he told himself, his fists clenching as he drove home in silence. But a small, insistent voice whispered in the depths of his mind, "You brought this on yourself." Meanwhile, Captain Harris sat across from her lawyer, Gloria Simmons, in an office lined with books and framed degrees. Her voice was unwavering as she recounted the ordeal, every detail etched with precision, the roughness of Daniel's grip, the sting of his words. The crowd stares. "He set me up," she said, her tone resolute. "There was no reason for him to think I was stealing." Gloria, a sharp-eyed woman with a reputation for dismantling injustice, nodded as she scribbled notes, her pen moving with purpose. "This isn't just wrongful arrest," she said, her voice crisp with conviction. "It's racial profiling, plain and simple. We're going to hold him accountable." Harris leaned back, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She'd faced countless challenges in her career: skepticism, subtle slights, outright hostility, but this was a wound that cut deeper, a betrayal that demanded retribution. Over the next few days, the story ignited, spreading through Atlanta like a wildfire. Local news vans camped outside the station, reporters clamoring for statements as the footage leaked online, each frame a testament to Daniel's abuse of power and Harris' unyielding dignity. The city watched, rapt, as the scales of justice began to tip, a stark reminder that power unchecked breeds ruin, and that consequences, like shadows, follow closely behind. The air was thick with tension as the hashtag #JusticeForHarris erupted across social media, a wildfire of outrage igniting thousands of voices demanding that Daniels lose his job. From the confines of his dimly lit living room, Daniels watched the chaos unfold on every channel, his dread swelling like a dark tide. His face flickered across screens nationwide, plastered alongside searing headlines and furious commentary that painted him as the villain in a story spiraling out of control. The public's hunger for answers gnawed at the department, which scrambled to patch the cracks in its crumbling facade. At home, his phone vibrated relentlessly on the coffee table, a symphony of buzzing that grated on his nerves. A few calls came from old friends, their voices tentative but warm with support. Though most were from reporters, their tones sharp and ravenous for a soundbite. He let each one ring out unanswered, his frustration simmering beneath a mask of silence. One chilly evening, as shadows stretched long across the hardwood floor, Daniels slumped in his worn leather armchair, cradling a glass of whiskey that burned his throat with every sip. The amber liquid caught the faint glow of a single lamp, casting fractured light across his tired features. His wife, Sarah, stepped into the room, her footsteps soft but deliberate, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "Mark," she murmured, her voice a gentle thread in the heavy stillness. As she settled onto the couch beside him, "Maybe it's time to take a step back, to think about all this. It's not going to just fade away." Her words hung between them, tender yet piercing. Daniels exhaled sharply, dragging a rough hand through his thinning hair. "I know I screwed up, Sarah," he admitted, his voice low and gravelly, tinged with a bitterness he couldn't shake. "But they're turning this into something it's not. It's a circus out there." Sarah's brow furrowed, her eyes searching his face. "Are they, though, or is this finally the reckoning you've been dodging?" Her question landed like a quiet thunderclap, and though it stung, Daniels couldn't muster a reply. He turned his gaze to the whiskey, swirling it absently, lost in the maze of his own thoughts. The next morning brought an unexpected twist, a sharp jolt to his unraveling world. Daniels maneuvered his sedan through the familiar streets toward the department, intent on retrieving a few personal items from his locker: a worn photo of his daughter, a scratched coffee mug, small anchors to a life that now felt distant. As he neared the station, his stomach tightened at the sight of a restless crowd gathered outside. Protesters stood shoulder to shoulder, their signs thrust high into the crisp air. No justice, no peace, and racial profiling. Accountability now. The words blazed in bold. Accusing strokes, each one a silent indictment. Daniels gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening as he tried to slip past unnoticed. His head ducked low beneath the brim of his cap, but a voice sliced through the murmur of the crowd. There he is. And in an instant, the mass surged toward his car like a wave crashing against a fragile shore. Their chants swelled, rhythmic and unyielding. No justice, no peace. His heart hammered against his ribs as he fumbled with the keys, parked haphazardly, and bolted inside, the shouts echoing in his ears like a relentless drumbeat. Within the station, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to its usual bustle. The air felt heavy, thick with unspoken tension. Colleagues who once greeted him with nods or easy banter now averted their eyes, their footsteps quick and purposeful as they passed. The hum of radios and ringing phones had dulled to a whisper, replaced by the soft rustle of papers and muted conversations behind closed doors. In the chief's office, Daniels faced yet another reckoning. The chief, a weary man with graying temples and a voice weathered by years of hard decisions, leaned back in his chair, his expression a mix of exhaustion and resolve. "Mark," he began, his tone carrying the weight of inevitability. "The department's under a spotlight hotter than we've ever seen. Internal affairs is crawling all over us, and the community's out for blood. We can't dodge this." Daniels nodded stiffly, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. "I get it, Chief. But what am I supposed to do? Roll over?" The chief's eyes narrowed, and he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the cluttered desk. "You Cooperate flyeth this investigation. And if you want any hope of clawing your way out of this mess, you've got to own what you did wrong." The words landed like stones in Daniel's gut, heavy and unyielding. He swallowed hard, pride warring with the dawning reality of his situation. "I'll cooperate," he muttered, the concession tasting bitter on his tongue. "But I'm not going down without a fight." As days bled into weeks, the investigation burrowed deeper, unearthing truths Daniels had long buried beneath layers of denial. Witnesses stepped forward, their accounts meticulously recorded, each statement a thread in a tapestry of accountability. The store manager, a weary man with a nervous tic and a voice that trembled only slightly, recounted the incident with chilling clarity. Daniel's raised voice, his unyielding stance, the way he'd dismissed every plea for reason. The testimony cut deeper than Daniels had expected, a mirror held up to a version of himself he didn't want to recognize. Meanwhile, Captain Harris moved through the storm with a quiet strength that seemed to defy the chaos around her. She returned to her duties at the station, her uniform crisp, her demeanor steady, earning nods of respect from colleagues and murmurs of admiration from the community she served. Yet beneath her composed exterior, Harris carried the weight of a fight she knew was far from finished. One night, as she stood in her small apartment, the glow of a bedside lamp casting soft shadows across the room, her phone buzzed with a message from Gloria, a fiery activist with a sharp mind and unshakable conviction. "We've got everything we need. Let's make our move." Harris stared at the screen, her fingers tightening around the device as a wave of determination surged through her. Tomorrow, she thought, the balance would tip. The following morning, Gloria strode into the courthouse, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she filed a lawsuit against Daniels and the department. The charges: racial profiling, wrongful arrest, defamation rang out like a clarion call, sending shockwaves through the station's hallowed halls. Daniels felt the ground shift beneath him, the walls of his world closing in tighter with every passing hour. But just as he braced himself against this latest blow, another storm broke. Internal affairs uncovered a trail of shadows in his past complaints of excessive force, offhand remarks laced with prejudice, arrests that skirted the edge of protocol hushed up, tucked away in forgotten files. The chief summoned him once more, his face a storm cloud of fury and regret as he slid a thick folder across the desk. "Mark, we've got a problem," he said, his voice low and cutting. "This isn't just about Harris anymore. There's a pattern here, and it's all spilling out now." Daniels flipped through the pages, each report a dagger to his predates, names, incidents he'd dismissed as trivial now staring back at him in stark black and white. "You're not just looking at a suspension. The chief continued, his words measured but merciless. This could mean termination, and if that lawsuit gains traction, it might not end there. Daniel's stomach churned, a sickening lurch as the life he'd built this badge. His reputation slipped through his grasp like sand. Stepping outside, he was met with a scene that drove the stakes even higher. The protesters had multiplied, their numbers swelling into a sea of raised fists and defiant voices. Their chants rolled through the streets, a tidal wave of demands for justice that crashed against the station's brick walls. In the heart of the crowd stood Captain Harris, her posture unwavering, clutching a sign that read justice for all in bold, unapologetic letters. Their eyes locked across the divide, a silent collision of past and present. For Daniels, time seemed to fracture, the weight of their shared history pressing down on him with moments of friction. The unspoken resentments, the storm that had erupted from a single, reckless act. Harris' face betrayed no hint of victory or malice, only a steely resolve that cut deeper than any accusation. Daniels, by contrast, felt stripped bare, his grip on the authority he'd wielded so confidently now faltering. "Hey, Daniels!" a reporter's shout pierced the haze, cameras swiveling toward him like predators locking onto prey. He clenched his jaw, shoving past the throng, their questions a barrage he couldn't outrun. His pulse thundered as he reached his car, slamming the door against the muffled roar of the chants that followed him still. Back home, Daniels collapsed into his recliner, the worn fabric a faint comfort against the turmoil raging within. The television blared the evening news, replaying footage of the protesters name a recurring refrain, each mention a fresh wound. Sarah entered quietly, her face etched with worry as she lingered in the doorway, watching the man she'd once known as unshakable now reduced to a hollow shell. "Mark," she said, her voice soft but firm, cutting through the drone of the broadcast. "You can't keep pretending this will just disappear. You've got to face it." He sighed, raking a hand through his hair, the gesture weary and defeated. "I know," he muttered, the words barely audible. "But what do I do? Say I'm sorry, admit I'm some kind of monster. That's the end of me, Sarah." She crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. "You've made mistakes, Mark, but this isn't just about saving your job. It's about doing what's right for once." He didn't answer, his eyes drifting to the screen where Harris spoke to a reporter, her voice calm yet piercing. "I'm not after revenge. I'm after accountability. This isn't about me, it's about making sure no one else has to endure this." Her words lingered, a quiet challenge to the man he'd been, and for the first time, Daniels felt the full weight of justice not as a concept he enforced, but as a force now bearing down on him, exposing the consequences of power wielded without care. The sting of guilt was a sensation Daniels hadn't let himself experience in years, a sharp, unfamiliar ache that pierced through the armor he'd built around his heart. It crept up on him slowly, a quiet whisper at first, then a roar he couldn't ignore. By the time the phone rang the next morning, he was already restless, pacing the worn hardwood floors of his apartment. His union representative's voice crackled through the line, calm but firm, delivering news that hit like a punch to the gut. A formal hearing had been scheduled. This was his moment, his chance to stand tall and explain himself, to claw his way back from the edge of disgrace. Yet, as the days ticked closer to that fateful meeting, a strange vulnerability took root in him. Daniels had always seen himself as unbreakably a man forged in the fire of countless shifts, a cop who never flinched. Now, though, he felt like he was teetering on a cliffside, the ground beneath him crumbling with every step, the wind howling in his ears. When the day arrived, Daniels stepped into the conference room with his pulse hammering in his chest, a wild rhythm that drowned out the murmur of voices around him. The space was suffocatingly familiar, yet alien all at once rows of chairs filled with faces he'd known for years, fellow officers with guarded expressions, department heads scribbling notes, and the stern-eyed internal affairs investigators who seemed to see right through him. The air was thick with tension, a storm brewing beneath the fluorescent lights. At the far end of the long table sat Captain Harris, her posture rigid, her lawyer perched beside her like a hawk ready to strike. Daniels' stomach churned as he took his seat, his hands clammy against the polished wood. The proceedings unfolded with ruthless precision. Harris's lawyer laid out the case like a master architect, each piece of video footage, Witness statements. A documented history of Daniels' behavior stacked meticulously into a tower of evidence that loomed over him. It was a portrait of a man undone by his own actions, and Daniels could feel the weight of every gaze in the room pressing down on him. When his turn came, he rose to his feet, his legs unsteady beneath him. He'd practiced his words late into the night, reciting them in front of his bathroom mirror until they felt solid. But now, under the scrutiny of those familiar faces, his carefully crafted defense felt flimsy, like a house of cards trembling in the wind. "I've served this department for over 15 years," he started, his voice steady at first. Though a faint tremor betrayed him, he gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles whitening. "I've made mistakes, plenty of them, but I've always tried to uphold the law, to do right by this badge." He paused, his eyes flickering toward Harris. Her face remained a mask of neutrality, giving nothing away, and that unnerved him more than any glare could have. "That day I acted on instinct. I thought I was doing my job, protecting people, but I see now how my biases twisted my judgment." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Some faces softened with a flicker of empathy, while others stayed hard and unyielding, their skepticism etched deep. Daniels pressed on, his voice faltering as he forced the next words out. "Am I a racist? I don't believe I am. But I get Edie understand why what I did could look that way. And for that, I'm sorry. Truly sorry." The silence that followed was heavy, a thick fog settling over the room. The panel exchanged glances, their expressions a cryptic puzzle he couldn't solve. After what felt like hours, the chief's voice cut through the quiet. "Thank you, Officer Daniels. We'll deliberate and let you know our decision." Walking out of that room, Daniels felt a strange cocktail of emotions swirling in his chest, relief that he'd spoken his piece, dread that it might not matter. His boots echoed on the linoleum floor, each step a reminder of the uncertainty ahead. Meanwhile, across the hall, Captain Harris and her lawyer, Gloria, stepped into the corridor with a quiet confidence. Gloria's sharp eyes glinted as she turned to her client. "That was a strong start," she said, her tone measured but encouraging. "But this isn't over, not by a long shot." Harris nodded, her jaw set with determination. She'd known from the beginning that the path to justice would be a marathon, not a sprint, and she was prepared to run it to the end, no matter how grueling it got. That evening, Daniels sat alone in his dimly lit living room, the TV flickering silently in the background when his phone buzzed again. It was the chief, his voice clipped and formal. "Mark, you're on unpaid suspension, effective immediately. We'll reassess your position depending on how the lawsuit shakes out." Daniels shut his eyes, letting the words sink in like stones dropping into a still pond. "Understood," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. The call ended, and he sat there, the silence pressing in around him, until the phone jolted him again, this time, an unknown number. Hesitant, he answered. "Officer Daniels," a deep, gravelly voice said, laced with a hint of amusement. "We need to talk. I've got information that could turn everything around." Daniels's heart lurched. "Who is this?" he demanded, his grip tightening on the phone. The voice chuckled, low and cryptic. "Let's just say I know things about Captain Harris that might catch your interest." Before Daniels could press further, the line went dead, leaving him staring at the blank screen, his mind racing. Who was this stranger? What could they possibly know about Harris? The dial tone hummed in his ear as curiosity and confusion twisted together in his gut. Sleep eluded him that night, his thoughts a tangled mess of doubt and instinct. By morning, the cop in him had taken over, suspension or not. He couldn't let this mystery scythe had to dig. He couldn't risk involving the department, not with eyes on him. But he still had allies in low places. He reached out to Rye, a weary, tech-savvy informant who'd been his eyes and ears for years. They met in a grimy diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where the coffee was bitter and the booths were sticky. Daniels slid into the corner seat, his voice hushed. "Rye, I need your help." Rye leaned back, sipping his coffee with a smirk. "You're the talk of the town, man. Everyone's got an opinion on your little mess." Daniels's jaw tightened, his patience fraying. "I don't need gossip. Someone called me last night, blocked number, said they had dirt on Harris. I need to know who and what." Rye's eyebrow arched, intrigue flickering in his eyes. "Captain Harris?" "This tied to your meltdown." Daniels shot him a glare. "Can you help me or not?" Rye shrugged, pulling out his battered laptop. "Sure, but it'll cost you." Daniels slid a roll of bills across the table, and Rye's fingers danced over the keys. Minutes later, he grinned. "Got something." Call came from a burner phone untraceable to a person, but it pinged a tower near Old Fourth Ward. Daniels frowned. That neighborhood was a maze of backroom deals and whispered secrets. "Anything else?" he pressed. Rye's smirk widened. "Not yet. Want me to dig into Harris's past? See if there's any juice?" Daniels hesitated, a flicker of unease in his chest. This was a line he wasn't sure he should cross. But desperation gnawed at him. "Do it," he said finally, his voice low. As Rye worked, Daniels couldn't shake the feeling he was wading into dangerous waters. He'd bent rules before, but this was different. This was personal, and the stakes felt higher than ever. Hours later, Rye's call pulled him to a quiet park, far from prying eyes. The informant handed over a thin folder, his usual cockiness replaced with a rare seriousness. "This is what I could scrape together fast. It's big." Daniels flipped it open, his eyes racing over the pages. His breath caught as he read about a sealed case from Harris's past, an undercover op that had spiraled out of control, leaving a civilian dead. She'd been cleared, but the file had been buried, the details shrouded in ambiguity. "Why'd this never come out?" Daniels asked, his mind spinning. Rye shrugged. "High-profile screw-ups get swept under the rug to save face. Word is, someone up top pulled strings to kill it." Daniels' thoughts churned. If Harris had skeletons like this, it could flip the narrative, even save his career. But using it was a gamble, one that could blow up in his face. As he clutched the folder, the lesson loomed large. Justice was a fragile thing, and power, when abused, left scars that rippled far beyond the moment. Harris, the department, even Daniels himself, they were all tangled in a web of consequences. And the truth, whatever it was, would demand its price. That night, under a sky heavy with stars, Daniel sat hunched in his beat-up sedan, parked just beyond the crumbling steps of his old precinct. The engine ticked faintly as it cooled, a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in his mind. He stared at the building, its windows glowing like judgmental eyes, watching officers shuffle in and out, some laughing, others grim-faced, all oblivious to the storm brewing within him. His thoughts churned relentlessly, a tempest of doubt and self-loathing. Could he really sink this low? Was he truly about to cross a line he'd sworn never to approach? His fingers twitched on the steering wheel, itching to turn the key and flee, when his phone jolted him with a sharp buzz. Another message. His heart thudded as he glanced at the screen, a blocked number, just like before. The words glowed in the dimness. "Meet me at the old warehouse on Pine Street. Midnight. Come alone." A shiver snaked down his spine, cold and unyielding. This was the moment that could unravel everything. He wrestled with the urge to call for backup, his thumb hovering over his partner's number. But the risk loomed too large. If anyone caught wind of this clandestine meeting, his career already dangling by a thread would snap entirely. By the stroke of midnight, Daniel's car rolled to a stop outside the abandoned warehouse, its hulking silhouette looming against the moonless sky. The air was thick with the scent of rust and neglect, the kind of place where secrets festered and died. His hand instinctively brushed the holster at his hip, the weight of his gun a small comfort as he stepped out into the oppressive stillness. The night was unnaturally quiet, no crickets, no distant traffic, just the hollow echo of his boots crunching gravel. Inside, the cavernous space swallowed sound, his every step reverberating off the rusted metal walls like a warning. In the center of the room stood a figure, their form swallowed by shadow, a faceless specter waiting patiently. Daniels, the voice cut through the silence, steady and deliberate, sending a jolt through him. He squinted, straining to pierce the darkness, his pulse hammering in his ears. "Who are you? What do you know about Harris?" he demanded, his voice rough with suspicion. The figure stepped forward, and the faint light filtering through a cracked window caught their face. Daniel's breath hitched, recognition slamming into him like a fist. Greg Mitchell, once a brother in arms, now a ghost from a tarnished past. Years ago, Greg had been drummed out of the force under a cloud of disgrace. his name whispered in hushed tones of betrayal. Now, here he stood, his smirk sharp as a blade. "Long time no see, Greg's tone dripped with bitter amusement. "Let's just say I've been keeping an eye on our precious Captain Harris. She's not the saint everyone paints her to be, and I've got the receipts to prove it." Daniel's chest tightened, his heart a frantic drumbeat. "Why me? What's your game here?" he pressed, searching Greg's shadowed eyes for answers. The ex-cop's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of something raw-wonger, maybe, or pain. "Payback." Greg spat. "She torched my career, left me to rot. Now it's her turn to burn." He reached into his jacket and produced a USB drive, holding it out like a poison chalice. "Everything you need is right here. Use it smart, Daniels." Daniel stared at the tiny device, his hand trembling as it hovered inches away. To take it was to step onto a razor's edgy path that could either resurrect his faltering reputation or bury him for good. His fingertips brushed the cool plastic, and in that heartbeat, the wail of sirens tore through the night. Both men froze, eyes wide with primal fear. "Cops," Greg snarled, shoving the drive into Daniel's hand. "You set me up." Daniel recoiled, shaking his head fiercely. "I didn't call anyone." But Greg wasn't listening, cursed under his breath and bolted, vanishing into the warehouse's labyrinthine shadows like a hunted animal. Daniel fumbled the drive into his pocket, adrenaline surging as he sprinted back to his car. Tires screeched as he peeled away, his mind a tangle of questions. Who had tipped off the police? What secrets lay buried in that drive? He rounded a corner, lost in the spiral of his thoughts, when an unmarked cruiser swerved into his path, cutting him off with brutal precision. "Step out of the car, Daniels," a voice barked deep, familiar, and laced with steel. His stomach plummeted. It was the chief. Daniel sat rigid in his seat, the cruiser's headlights slashing across his face, painting jagged shadows that mirrored the fractures in his resolve. The chief's command rang in his ears, each word a hammer strike against his fragile composure. He clutched the USB drive in his pocket, its edges digging into his palm as he glanced into the rearview mirror. Two more squad cars screeched to a halt behind him, their lights pulsing red and blue like the heartbeat of his unraveling life. With no escape, he exhaled shakily, pushed the door open, and stepped into the biting chill. Raising his hands slightly, he fought to steady his breathing, to mask the terror clawing at his insides. The chief approached, his silhouette towering against the glare, his face a granite mask of barely contained rage. "You've got some guts, Daniels," he growled, his voice low and venomous. "Care to explain why you're sneaking around with Greg Mitchell of all people?" Daniel swallowed hard, the lump in his throat like a stone. "Chief, I can explain." The chief's hand shot up, silencing him. "Spare me. You've been watched since we suspended you. Did you really think you could slink around behind our backs and stir the pot without us noticing?" Daniel's jaw tightened, his mind scrambling for a lifeline. "Greg reached out," he said, forcing the words out. "He claimed he had dirt that could clear my name." The chief's eyes narrowed to slits, skepticism etched into every line of his face. "And you bought that? After all he's done?" Daniel hesitated, then pulled the drive from his pocket, holding it up like a fragile offering. "He gave me this. Said it's proof Harris has been hiding something big." The chief stared at the drive, his expression unreadable, before shaking his head in disgust. "You're ready to sell out another cop on the word of a washed-up traitor. Pathetic." Daniel opened his mouth to argue, but the chief cut him off again. "Get in the car," he ordered, his tone a quiet threat. "We're going to the station. You're going to spill everything." The ride back was a suffocating eternity, the silence pressing down on Daniel like a vice. He sat in the back seat of the unmarked car, the leather creaking beneath him, the faint hum of the engine the only sound as the city blurred past. His hands fidgeted in his lap, the drive burning a hole in his pocket, a ticking bomb he couldn't defuse. At the station, they marched him into an interrogation room, a sterile box of concrete and flickering fluorescent lights. The chief sat across from him, his gaze piercing, unrelenting. "All right, Daniels," he said, folding his arms with deliberate calm. "Start talking. What did Mitchell tell you?" Daniel recounted the night in halting bursts cryptic text. The tense meeting in the warehouse, Greg's accusations, the sudden chaos of the sirens. He handed over the drive, watching as the chief turned it over in his hands, inspecting it like evidence from a crime scene. "We'll see what's on this," the chief muttered, passing it to a technician who lingered nearby. "But if this is a Lee or some desperate stunt, you're finished." "Got it." Daniel nodded, his throat too dry to speak. Hours dragged by, each minute an anvil on his chest. He sat alone in the room, the air thick with tension, his mind replaying every choice that had led him here. He thought of Greg and Sakaki, quick-witted partner who'd shared late-night coffee runs and gallows humor, now a bitter shell consumed by vengeance. He thought of Harris, her steely resolve and quiet competence, the woman he'd envied and now doubted, and he thought of himself adrift, desperate, clinging to the wreckage of his principles. When the chief finally returned, his face was a storm cloud, grim and foreboding. Daniel's voice trembled as he whispered, "Well," the chief dropped a thick file onto the table, flipping it open to reveal a sprawl of documents and grainy video stills. "There's damning stuff here, all right," he said, his voice low and measured, "but not how you think." Daniel frowned, leaning forward, dread pooling in his gut. "What do you mean?" The chief's eyes locked onto his. "This drivet's got footage from Harris's undercover up years back. She wasn't just following orders, she went above and beyond. Risked her neck to shield civilians when everything went to hell. She's no crook, Daniels. She's a goddamn hero." The words hit like a tidal wave, drowning Daniel in shame. His shoulders slumped, his breath shallow as the truth sank in. He'd been so blinded by his own desperation, so eager to claw his way back from disgrace, that he'd latched onto Greg's poison without a second thought. Harris wasn't the villain Greg was, and Daniel had nearly become his pawn. The room seemed to shrink around him, the walls closing in as the chief leaned back, his gaze softening just a fraction. "You've got a choice now, Daniels. You can keep digging your hole, or you can learn from this justice isn't a weapon to wield for your own gain. Power, misused, chews up everyone in its path." Harris knew that. Mitchell didn't. "Where do you stand?" Daniel stared at the table. The file splayed open before him like a mirror to his failures. The lesson stung, raw and unsparing. True justice demanded sacrifice, not shortcuts. And the cost of abusing trust was a wreckage he could no longer ignore. The air in the precinct felt heavier than usual, thick with unspoken accusations and the weight of betrayal. Daniels had always known there were forces working against him, jealous colleagues, petty rivals, but never had he imagined the depth of the web ensnaring him. He sat across from the chief, his palms damp, his throat tight, watching as the older man's face shifted from stern professionalism to something darker, more troubled. The chief's fingers lingered on a worn manila folder before he pushed it across the scratched wooden table, the faint scrape of paper against wood cutting through the tense silence. "There's more to this mess than you realize," he said, his voice low and gravelly, tinged with a weariness that suggested he'd seen too many good men fall. "This isn't just about you being a convenient target. Take a look." Daniels hesitated, his heart thudding painfully in his chest before flipping open the file. The words blurred at first, his mind racing too fast to process them. But as he forced himself to focus, the truth clawed its way to the surface. Greg Mitchell, his supposed ally, the man who'd clapped him on the back and shared beers after long shift, stared back at him. From a grainy photograph, his smug grin frozen in time. The documents laid out a damning story: evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, a trail of dirty deeds stretching back years. Daniel's breath caught as he pieced it together. "He set me up," his voice cracked, disbelief warring with a rising tide of anger. The chief gave a slow, somber nod, his eyes never leaving Daniel's. "Looks that way." Mitchell's been scrambling to bury his tracks, and I were the perfect distraction. Relief flickered through Daniel's, fleeting and fragile, like a match struck in a storm. He'd unknowingly handed the chief the key to unraveling Mitchell's corruption. A USB drive packed with incriminating data he'd stumbled upon during a late-night hunch. But the victory tasted bitter, overshadowed by a gnawing dread that coiled in his gut. His name was still muddied, his career a shattered mosaic of half-truths and whispered suspicions. The chief rose, his chair creaking under his weight, and paused at the door. his broad silhouette framed by the dim hallway light. "You're damn lucky, Daniels," he said, his tone laced with a reluctant pity that stung worse than outright condemnation. "This could have ended with you in a cell or worse. But don't kid yourself into thinking you're clear of this storm. You've got a steep hill to climb, and luck won't carry you up it." With that, he was gone, leaving Daniels alone in the suffocating quiet of the room. For the first time in his decade-long career, Daniels felt adrift, unmoored from the identity he'd painstakingly forged. He'd always prided himself on being the unyielding cop, the one who faced down chaos with a steady hand and a sharper mind. Now, staring at the peeling paint on the walls, he saw the cracks in that facade. His reputation, once a fortress, had been built on sand, eroded by choices he'd buried under bravado and denial. The silence pressed in, amplifying the tumult in his head. Regret, shame, and a stubborn spark of defiance that refused to gutter out. He wouldn't surrender to this. Not yet. Justice wasn't a gift handed down, it was a battle, and he'd fight to reclaim his place in it, starting with owning the wreckage he'd helped create. The road ahead loomed long and unforgiving, but as the first faint rays of resolve pierced his despair, he knew he'd walk it, no matter the cost. The next morning found him hunched over a chipped kitchen table in his cramped apartment, the bitter scent of untouched coffee mingling with the stale air. His eyes, red-rimmed from sleeplessness, traced the swirling patterns of steam rising from the mug as his mind replayed the last few days. In relentless loops, the USB drive's weight in his pocket, Mitchell's oily reassurances over the phone. The chief's piercing gaze, each memory was a shard of glass, cutting deeper with every pass. A sharp rap at the door jolted him upright, his hand instinctively brushing the holster he hadn't yet shed. Through the peephole, he saw Captain Harris, her face a mask of guarded neutrality, her posture rigid with purpose. Hesitation gripped him, but he unlatched the door, his voice rasping with exhaustion. "Captain, what's this about?" Harris didn't wait for an invitation, brushing past him with the confidence of someone who'd earned her stripes through grit and guile. She dropped a thick manila folder onto the table with a soft thud, then settled into a chair, her sharp eyes locking onto his. "We need to talk," she said, her words clipped but not cold, carrying an undercurrent of urgency that set Daniel's nerves on edge. He shut the door and sat opposite her, his hands clasped tightly to steady their tremor. "I'm guessing you're not here to check on my well-being," he said, forcing a wry edge into his tone. Harris arched a brow, a flicker of dry humor crossing her face. "Not quite. The chief briefed me last night everything about the USB, Mitchell, the whole damn mess. You've stepped into something bigger than you know." Daniels nodded, the motion slow and deliberate, as if testing the weight of her words. "I didn't see it coming," he admitted, his voice quieter now, tinged with a raw honesty he rarely let slip. "Mitchell called me, said he had something on Usamething that could pull me out of the hole I was in." I thought he trailed off, shame burning his throat. Harris cut in, her bluntness a lifeline pulling him back. "You thought it'd save your skin. I get it. But here's the kicker, Danielle's you were digging in the wrong dirt. Mitchell's the one you should have been watching." Confusion creased his brow. What are you saying?" Harris leaned forward, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper, as if the walls themselves might betray them. "Mitchell's been rotten for your shitty deals, payoffs, you name it. He's a snake, always slithering out of reach. I've been tracking him since he left the force, building a case brick by brick." She tapped the folder, her fingers lingering on its edge. "This is what I've got to make him sweat, but not enough to bury him. Until you handed us that drive. Now, we've got him dead to rights." Daniel's stomach twisted, a knot of guilt and cautious hope tightening within him. Why keep this quiet? Why not take it to the brass sooner? Harris exhaled sharply, frustration etching lines into her weathered face. "I tried, but without hard proof. It was my word against his. The department's got its own skeletons, Danielle, you know that. I had to play it careful, gather what I could in the shadows. Your stumble into this gave us the break I needed." She fixed him with a steely look. "So here's the deal, we've finished this together. Mitchell's going down, but I need you with me." Surprise jolted through him, widening his eyes. "You're asking me to help, after the mess I've made?" Harris nodded, unflinching. "You've screwed up, no question, big time. But you've also cracked this wide open. Like it or not, we're tied to this now, Ewan." Daniels paused, the gravity of her offer sinking in, then gave a firm nod. "Yeah. Where do we start?" Harris pulled a creased city map from the folder, spreading it across the table. Her finger jabbed at circled spots: warehouses, back alley dives, safe house, each a node in Mitchell's sprawling web. These are his haunts. We hit them systematically, collect what we can, and lock him out for good. Daniels studied the map, a flicker of purpose reigniting in his chest, warming the cold hollow that had settled there. "And the chief, he'll lose it if we go off book." Harris smirked, a glint of defiance in her eyes. "Leave him to me. You just keep your head in the game." Over the next few days, they moved like ghosts through the city's underbelly, cloaked in secrecy and driven by a shared hunger for justice. They staked out Mitchell's haunts, from rusted fire escapes and shadowed doorways, their breaths fogging in the chill night air as they catalogued every suspicious move. Harris' network of loyal Officer Chardon veterans, who'd seen enough corruption to trust her instincts for them scraps of intel. Their voices hushed over crackling radios. Each lead tightened the noose, and soon they found themselves crouched outside Mitchell's main warehouse, a hulking relic of faded brick and splintered boards. The night was moonless, the only light spilling from flickering street lamps, casting jagged shadows across the guarded perimeter. Harris checked her sidearm, her jaw set. "This is our shot. You ready?" Daniels nodded, adrenaline surging through his veins like wildfire. "Let's take him." They slipped through the darkness, footsteps muffled against the damp concrete, weaving past armed sentries with practiced stealth. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of towering crates and rusted machinery, the air thick with the acrid tang of oil and decay. Voices drifted from deeper within, low, terse, threaded with menace. Harris gestured for Daniels to follow, her movements precise as they crept toward the heart of the beast. There, bathed in the sickly glow of a hanging bulb, stood Mitchell, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the grime around him. He loomed over a table strewn with cash and papers, barking orders at two burly guards whose eyes darted like predators on edge. Harris eased her phone from her pocket, recording the scene with a steady hand. "We've got him," she breathed, triumph edging her whisper. But fate turned cruel in an instant. A guard's head snapped up, his gaze locking onto their hiding spot. "We've got company," he roared, his gun flashing in the dim light. Chaos erupted, bullets tearing through the air as Daniels and Harris dove behind a stack of crates. The warehouse became a battlefield, the clang of gunfire ricocheting off metal walls, the stench of gunpowder choking their lungs. Daniels fired back, his shot finding its mark as one guard crumpled with a guttural cry. Harris surged forward, her focus razor-sharp, closing in on Mitchell. The man snatched a briefcase from the table, his face a mask of panicked fury, and bolted for the rear exit, his last guard laying down a hail of cover fire. "He's running," Daniels yelled, adrenaline propelling him after Harris. He dropped the remaining guard with a precise shot, then sprinted through the labyrinth, ducking swinging chains and leaping over debris. Mitchell burst through the exit, only to freeze as blinding lights and shouting officers swarmed the lot outside. "Freeze!" the chief's voice thundered, authoritative and unyielding, cutting through the night. Mitchell skidded to a stop, his briefcase slipping from his grasp to thud against the pavement, his hands rising in defeat as panic drained the color from his face. The chief strode forward, his expression a storm of grim satisfaction and lingering frustration. "Good work," he said, his eyes flicking between Harris and Daniels. The weight of those words settled over Daniels' net absolution, but a hard-earned chance to rebuild. As Mitchell was cuffed and led away, Daniels felt the lesson sear into him. Power, unchecked, devoured everything in its path, and justice demanded vigilance, not just vengeance. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in weeks, he stood taller, ready to face whatever came next. The night air clung to them, thick with the acrid sting of gunpowder and the metallic tang of oil. As Mitchell's figure slumped in defeat, his wrists, now bound by cold steel cuffs, glinted faintly under the flickering streetlights. Officers flanked him, their boots scuffing the gravel as they guided him toward the squad car waiting like a silent predator in the shadows. His head hung low, not in shame, but in the exhaustion of a man who'd played a high-stakes game and lost. Daniels watched the scene unfold from a distance, his chest rising and falling with breaths he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Relief washed over him, a cool tide sweeping away months of doubt. Yet beneath it simmered a quiet ember of unease. This wasn't the end, it was barely a beginning. Beside him, Harris turned, her sharp eyes catching his. A rare smile tugged at her lips, softening the hard edges of her face, weathered by years of battles both seen and unseen. "You good?" she asked, her voice steady, but laced with a warmth Daniels hadn't expected. He nodded, the motion slow, deliberate. Words felt inadequate to capture the storm of emotions swirling within him. Redemption, yes, but also the gnawing awareness that justice was a relentless beast, never sated by a single victory. As the squad car's engine growled to life and its red and blue lights painted the warehouse walls, the sirens wailed into the distance, fading like a mournful cry swallowed by the night. The two stood there, outside the hulking shell of the warehouse, its rusted beams and shattered windows bearing witness to their triumph. The weight that had pressed on their shoulders for months lifted, if only slightly. Mitchell, the puppet master of a sprawling web of corruption, was finally in chains. Yet, as the breeze carried the scent of decay from the industrial sprawl around them, Daniels felt the truth settle in his bones. Every thread they pulled unraveled a dozen more. Harris, ever the pragmatist, caught her breath, her gaze drifting toward the horizon where the city lights flickered like distant stars. She didn't need to say it, they both knew this was merely one skirmish in a war that stretched far beyond the horizon. Footsteps crunched behind them, deliberate and heavy. The chief emerged from the shadows, his broad frame silhouetted against the dim glow of the lot. Exhaustion carved deep lines into his face, but his eyes burned with a quiet pride. "You'd have pulled off something big tonight," he said, his voice a low rumble, tempered by years of hard-earned wisdom. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, then added, "But don't think for a second this means everything's back to normal." Daniels met his gaze, his jaw tightening. The chief wasn't wrong. The road ahead stretched out like a dark, winding path, littered with the debris of his own past mistakes. "I know, Chief," he replied, his tone steady but heavy with resolve. "There's still a lot to answer for." The chief's eyes lingered on Daniels, piercing through the younger man's defenses. "You've got a long road ahead, Mark," he said, his voice softening just enough to hint at something like faith. "But tonight was a step in the right direction. Keep it up, and maybe, just maybe, you'll claw back some of that trust you lost." Daniels felt a flicker of hope ignite within him, fragile but real. He wanted to believe it, to grasp onto that lifeline. But the weight of his tarnished reputation pressed down harder. One successful night couldn't erase the years of shortcuts and compromises that had stained his name. Still, the chief's words planted a seed, and for the first time in months, he dared to imagine it might grow. Turning to Harris, the chief's demeanor shifted, his tone carrying a note of respect reserved for few. "Captain Harris, you've proven once again why you're one of the best. Keep leading by example." She nodded, her expression calm but unyielding, a fortress of determination. "Thank you, Chief," she said, her voice even. "But this isn't over yet. Mitchell's arrest is just the first domino. We need to topple his entire network." The chief's lips pressed into a thin line, his agreement unspoken but palpable. "We'll start processing the evidence you gathered tonight," he said. "Expect a briefing in the morning." With that, he turned and walked away, his figure retreating into the gloom, leaving Harris and Daniels alone in the stillness of the lot. "You heading home?" Harris asked, her tone lighter now, as if the night's victory had loosened something within her. Daniels sighed, the exhaustion seeping into his bones. "Yeah, I could use some sleep." She gave him a small nod, her eyes glinting with understanding. "Get some rest. We've got a mountain to climb tomorrow." As he drove home, the adrenaline that had fueled him began to ebb, leaving behind a hollow ache. The city blurred past his Windownian signs, empty streets, the hum of a world oblivious to the battle they'd just fought. His mind raced, replaying every moment of the night, every decision that had led them to this fragile triumph. When he finally collapsed into bed, sleep came swiftly, pulling him into dreams of his early days on the force. Back then, justice had been a beacon, pure and unshakable, untainted by the great compromises he'd later learned to navigate. The next morning, Daniels arrived at the precinct before the sun had fully risen. The sky still streaked with hues of dawn. The air inside buzzed with tension, a hive of activity as officers moved with purpose sorting files, murmuring over coffee-stained reports, preparing for what promised to be a seismic crackdown. In the briefing room, Harris stood at the front, her presence commanding attention. A map glowed on the screen behind her, dotted with red markers like wounds on a battlefield. Mitchell's arrest was a major victory, she said, her voice cutting through the room's low hum. But his operation runs deep. We've identified key player Sleutons who've been laundering money, moving contraband, keeping his empire alive. Our goal is to bring them all down. Daniels leaned forward, absorbing every word, every detail. For the first time in weeks, he felt anchored, like he belonged in this fight. As the briefing ended, Harris approached him, her steps brisk. "You up for another field operation?" she asked, her eyes searching his. He straightened, resolve hardening within him. "Absolutely." She handed him a file, its edges worn from handling. "Good. We've got a lead on Darren Blake, one of Mitchell's top lieutenants. He's been running a safe house on the south side, and word is he's planning to bolt. We need to move fast." Daniels flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening as he studied Blake's photo, a sharp-featured man with a predator's smirk. "Let's get him," he said, his voice low but firm. Hours later, they sat in an unmarked car parked outside a crumbling house in a forgotten corner of the city. The neighborhood was eerily still, its silence broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves skittering across the pavement. People moved in and out of the house, their steps to precise, to rehearsed. "Blake's in there," Harris said, her eyes locked on the building, her fingers tapping lightly against the steering wheel. "We wait for backup, then we movin'." Daniels nodded, but a prickle of unease crawled up his spine. He scanned the street boarded-up windows, the flicker of a streetlight about to die. "Harris," he said quietly, "I don't like this. It's too quiet." She frowned, her hand drifting to her holster. "Stay sharp," she replied, trusting his instinct enough to heighten her own vigilance. When backup arrived, a squad of officers clad in tactical gear, the air crackled with anticipation. Harris and Daniels led the charge, their movements swift and silent as they breached the house. Inside, chaos ragned rooms stuffed with stacks of cash, crates of stolen goods, and illegal firearms gleaming in the dim light. They cleared each space methodically, but Blake was nowhere to be found. "Damn it," Harris muttered, her frustration a sharp edge in her voice. Then a crash erupted from the back, loud and jarring. They exchanged a glance, weapons drawn, and sprinted toward the sound. A hidden door yawned open behind a bookshelf, its hinges groaning as they descended into a basement that felt like another world, clean, sterile, lined with surveillance screens and blinking tech. At the far end, Darren Blake stood, his lean frame hunched over a laptop, fingers flying across the keys in a frantic dance. He froze as their flashlights cut through the gloom, his hand darting toward a gun on the table. "Don't even think about it," Harris barked, her weapon steady, her voice ice cold. Blake's eyes flicked between them, wild and desperate, before he snatched the laptop and lunged for a side exit. Daniels surged after him, his heart hammering in his chest. "Stop!" he shouted, but Blake was a shadow, slipping through the narrow passage. The chase spilled into the alley, where Blake stumbled, nearly crashing into a rusted sedan. The laptop flew from his grasp, shattering against the pavement in a spray of plastic and metal. Harris caught up, her gun trained on him. "You're done, Blake," she said, her tone final. He raised his hands, panting, defiance flickering in his glare. "You don't know what you're messing with," he spat. Daniels grabbed him, his grip iron tight as he cuffed the man's wrists. "Then you better start talking," he growled. Harris knelt beside the broken laptop, her fingers tracing the cracked hard drive. "This might still be salvageable," she murmured, hope threading through her words. "If we can pull the data, it could lead us to the rest of Mitchell's network." Daniels nodded, a grim resolve settling over him. Every step deeper into this abyss revealed more shadows, more threats, but retreat wasn't an option. As they hauled Blake back to the precinct, his warning lingered in Danielle's mind like a storm cloud on the horizon. Mitchell's just the tip of the iceberg. The precinct thrummed with controlled House officers cataloging evidence, voices overlapping in a tense symphony. Daniels shoved Blake toward the interrogation room, his gut twisting with the certainty that the worst was still lurking, waiting to strike. This wasn't just about catching criminals. It was a brutal lesson in justice, a reminder that power, when twisted, left scars that stretched far beyond its wielders. Mitchell's Fallon Blake's exposed the fragility of trust and the cost of betrayal, but it also lit a fire in Daniels, a resolve to keep fighting, no matter how steep the climb. The air in the interrogation room hung thick with tension as Blake sat there, his wrists bound by cuffs that clinked faintly against the metal chair. His fingers tightened around the armrests, a subtle defiance radiating from his posture despite the precariousness of his situation. A smirk tugged at the corners of his mouth, sharp and self-assured, as if he held a secret too vast for the small, dimly lit space to contain. His arrest hadn't shaken him. If anything, it seemed to fuel his bravado. Across from him, Officer Daniels loomed, his broad shoulders casting a shadow over the table. His voice cut through the silence, low and deliberate, like the slow drip of water wearing down stone. "You're in deep, Blake. Start talking. Who's behind this?" Blake's chuckle was a jagged sound, rough around the edges, as he tilted his head back slightly, meeting Daniel's icy stare with a glint of amusement. "You've got no clue what you're stepping into," he muttered, his tone laced with a dark certainty that sent a shiver down Daniel's spine. "You think Mitchell's the big bad wolf. He's a pawn, a nobody compared to the ones really running the show." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication, daring Daniels to push further. The officer's jaw tightened, his patience fraying as he leaned in closer, the faint scent of coffee on his breath mingling with the stale odor of the room. "Then give me names," he pressed, his voice a quiet growl. "Who's pulling the strings?" Blake's smirk widened, though a flicker of something fear perhaps danced briefly in his hazel eyes before he masked it with a shake of his head. "You think I'd spill that easily? I'm not looking to sign my own death warrant." His defiance was a wall, unyielding and cold, built from years of navigating a world where loyalty meant survival, and betrayal meant a shallow grave. Before Daniels could fire back, the door creaked open and Officer Harris stepped inside, her boots clicking sharply against the tiled floor. In her hands, she cradled the shattered remains of Blake's laptop, its cracked casing glinting under the fluorescent lights, like the broken shell of a once proud creature. She set the pieces down with deliberate care, her gaze locking onto Blake's with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably in his seat. "You're clever, Blake," Harris said, her voice steady but edged with steel. "Smart enough to know we'll dig up whatever's buried in this mess. Cooperate now, and maybe just maybe you can cut you a deal." For a fleeting moment, Blake's smug facade cracked, his lips twitching as doubt crept into his expression. But he recovered quickly, leaning back with a forced nonchalance. "Good luck cracking that," he sneered. "Even if you pull something out of it, you'll hit nothing but brick walls. These people, they don't leave breadcrumbs." Harris didn't flinch, her eyes narrowed slightly, a silent promise that she'd unravel his secrets one way or another. With a curt nod to Daniels, she turned and strode out, her partner falling into step behind her. In the hallway, the air felt cooler, less suffocating, though the weight of their task pressed down just as heavily. Harris handed the mangled drive to a tech specialist, a weary man named Carter, whose fingers trembled faintly with excitement as he took it. "Get me everything," she instructed, her tone leaving no room for error. "Every file, every scrap, every deleted byte, I want it all." Carter nodded, his glasses slipping down his nose as he hurried off, clutching the drive like a treasure hunter with a map to untold riches. Turning to Daniels, Harris's face darkened, her brows knitting together in grim determination. "Blake's scared," she said softly, almost to herself. "Whoever he's shielding. They're bigger than Mitchell, much bigger." Daniels frowned, his mind racing as he rubbed a hand over his stubbled chin. "If we don't move fast, they'll burn everything down and vanish." Harris folded her arms, her thoughts spiraling as she stared down the empty corridor. "Then we outpace them," she murmured. "We start with what we've got." The next several hours blurred into a haze of caffeine and paperwork as the two officers barricaded themselves in a cramped office, surrounded by towering stacks of case files. The room smelled of ink and old paper, the faint hum of a flickering bulb overhead their only companion. They pored over documents, tracing Mitchell's operations through a labyrinth of offshore accounts, shell companies, and supply chains that snaked across state lines like veins in a corrupted body. Each connection they uncovered painted a broader, more sinister portrait, not just a criminal syndicate, but a sprawling web of power woven into the city's very foundation. The deeper they dug, the more they realized this wasn't about petty crime. It was about control, about justice twisted into a tool for the powerful. By evening, Carter returned, his face flushed with a mix of exhaustion and triumph. "I salvaged a few files," he said, handing Harris a USB stick that felt impossibly small for the secrets it might hold. "It's not a lot, but it's something." Harris plugged it into her laptop, the screen casting a pale glow over her and Daniels as they leaned in, their breaths catching in unison. Documents flickered to life-encrypted messages, grainy surveillance photos, and a list of names paired with dates and dollar figures that screamed corruption. "Payments," Daniels muttered, his finger tracing the screen as his mind churned. "But for what?" Harris clicked another file, revealing images of city officials shaking hands with Mitchell in shadowed corners. "Bribery," she mused, her voice tight. "Or blackmail." Daniels jabbed at one photo, his eyes widening. "That's Councilman Reed. He's been preaching clean streets for years." The revelation hit like a punch to the gut. Harris's expression hardened, her fingers curling into fists. "If Reed's dirty, this climbs higher than we imagined." Just then, the door swung open, and Chief Ramsey stepped in, his weathered face etched with worry. He shut the door with a soft thud, his sigh heavy as he ran a hand through his graying hair. "We've got trouble," he said, his voice gravelly, words out about Blake. "Mitchell's crew is moving, shutting down, disappearing." Daniels swore under his breath, the frustration boiling over. "We're losing them." Ramsey nodded, his eyes shadowed. "Warrants are ready from multiple sites, but we've got one chance to nail this." Harris stood, her resolve a steel rod in her spine. "Then we hit them all. Hard. No heads up, no escape." The precinct buzzed with nervous energy as the team mobilized, officers donning vests and checking weapons under the dim glow of streetlights, filtering through the windows. This wasn't just a raid, it was a reckoning, the biggest operation their unit had ever dared to undertake. Failure loomed like a specter, but Harris and Daniels pressed forward, leading a strike team to a sprawling warehouse on the city's edge. The building loomed in the darkness, its rusted walls hiding a hive of illicit activity. The raid unfolded in a blur of shouts and shattering glass, officers flooding the space, securing crates of evidence and cuffing suspects who snarled like cornered animals. Harris and Daniels pushed deeper, their flashlights cutting through the gloom until they found a concealed office, tucked behind a false wall. Inside, a safe gleamed dully in the corner, its presence a silent taunt. Harris knelt before it, her hands steady as Daniels worked the lock with a practiced touch. "Got it," he grunted as the door swung open, revealing stacks of ledgers, cash, and a sealed envelope marked confidential in stark red ink. Harris's pulse thundered as she tore it open, her eyes scanning pages that detailed payouts to official scopes, judges, and impossibly, Chief Ramsey. "Daniels," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief, "look at this." He peered over her shoulder, his breath hitching as the truth sank in. "This can't be real," he said, but Harris's jaw clenched. "It is, and it changes everything." Footsteps echoed outside, jolting them back to the moment. Harris shoved the papers back into the envelope, her mind racing. "We've got to get this to the precinct boot. We can't trust anyone yet." Daniels nodded, his face pale as they slipped out, the weight of their discovery a leaden burden. The drive back was a silent torment, the envelope resting on Harris's lap like a grenade with a loose pin. Daniel's knuckles whitened on the wheel, the city lights blurring past as the unspoken question gnawed at them. "Do you trust the chief?" he finally asked, his voice raw. Harris stared ahead, her faith unraveling. "I did. But if this is true," she didn't finish. the betrayal cutting to deep. At the precinct, Harris bypassed Ramsey's office, leading Daniels to a locked evidence room instead. She bolted the door, placing the envelope and laptop on a table littered with dust and forgotten files. "We verify it all first," she said, her voice firm despite the storm inside her. "No leaks, no risks." Daniels hesitated, pulling out his phone. "Internal affairs?" Harris shook her head, her fingers already dancing over the laptop's keys to crack its defenses. "Not yet. We don't know who's clean." As the screen flickered to life, they stood on the edge of a precipice. The lesson stark and unforgiving. Power, when abused, corroded everything just as most of all. The conspiracy they'd uncovered wasn't just a crime, it was a mirror, reflecting the cost of trust misplaced and the relentless pursuit of truth in a world that thrived on shadows. The dimly lit room was suffocating under the weight of discovery as Daniels and Harris pored over the sprawling labyrinth of financial records. Hours bled into one another, each passing minute tightening the knot of dread in Daniels' chest. His fingers trembled slightly as they traced the lines of transactions, many, flowing like a dark river through a web so intricate it seemed alive, pulsing with secrets. The ledgers weren't just numbers, they were a betrayal carved in ink, linking Mitchell's shadowy empire to men and women whose names had once symbolized authority and honor. High-ranking officials, people Daniels had saluted, admired. Even Invidno stared back at him from the page like ghosts unmasked. Each name stabbed deeper into the fragile trust he'd spent years building. A trust that had been the bedrock of his career, now crumbling beneath the weight of corruption. Harris sat across from him, her sharp eyes scanning the screen, her jaw tight with a fury she didn't voice. The glow of the monitor cast harsh shadows across her face, accentuating the lines of exhaustion she refused to acknowledge. She'd always been the steady one, the unshakable force in their partnership, but even she couldn't hide the storm brewing behind her grim expression. When they uncovered the Maelstros cryptic, damning exchanges between Mitchell and Chief Larson, air in the room seemed to thicken. The words were veiled, cloaked in careful phrasing, but their meaning sliced through the haze like a blade. Mitchell had funneled money, vast sums of it, into Larson's pockets, and in return, the chief had offered a shield of protection and whispers of insider knowledge. It was a pact sealed in greed, a betrayal so profound it left Harris reeling, her faith in the system she'd sworn to uphold fracturing with every line she read. Daniels leaned back in his chair, the creak of its springs echoing in the silence. He pressed his palms against his temples, trying to knead away the throbbing ache that had settled there. "This is worse than I ever imagined," he muttered, his voice rough with disbelief and a bitter edge of despair. Harris didn't look up, but her nod was sharp, her lips pressed into a thin line. "We've got enough here to take to the Attorney General," she said, her tone clipped, each word heavy with resolve. "But if we do, it's going to rip the department apart, top to bottom. Nothing will be left standing." Her eyes flicked to his, searching for something agreement. Reassurance, maybe just a shared sense of the abyss they were staring into. Before Daniels could find the words, a sharp rap at the door jolted them both. "Who is it?" Harris called, her hand sliding instinctively to the holster at her hip, fingers brushing the cool metal of her weapon. Her voice was steady, but Daniels caught the flicker of unease in her posture. "It's Officer Brooks." Came the muffled reply from the other side. "The chief's looking for you both. He wants you in his office now." Harris hesitated, her gaze locking with Daniels for a heartbeat. Suspicion coiled between them, unspoken but palpable. She rose, her movements deliberate, and unlatched the door. Brooks stepped inside, his broad frame filling the threshold. He was younger than them, barely past his rookie years, but his face carried a seriousness that aged him beyond his time. His dark eyes darted between them, shadowed with something he wouldn't or couldn't name. "The chief knows you've got something," he said quietly, his voice low as if the walls themselves might betray him. "He's called an emergency meeting. You're both expected." Daniel's stomach twisted. "Did he say why?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. Brooks shook his head, his short-cropped hair catching the faint light. "Just that it's about the Mitchell case." But he didn't look happy, not one bit. Harris shot Daniels a look, her brow furrowing slightly, a silent agreement passing between them, "Thanks, Brooks," she said. Her tone clipped but not unkind. "We'll be there in a minute," as Brooks turned to leave, his heavy boots thudding softly against the floor. Harris locked the door behind him with a decisive click. She turned to Daniels, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "We're running out of time. If Larson knows we're onto him, he'll start burying evidence faster than we can dig it up." Daniels stood, his jaw tightening with a resolve that felt more like defiance than courage. "Then we face him head-on," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his gut. "We walk in there, lay out every shred of proof, and see how he squirms." Harris paused, her hand hovering over the stack of files, doubt flickering in her eyes. She wasn't one to rush into a fight without a plan, and Daniels knew it. But after a moment, she nodded, a spark of determination igniting behind her hesitation. "Fine, but we're not going in alone. If this blows up, we need witness people who can back us up when the dust settles." They moved quickly, their hands deft as they duplicated the documents and files, every page a weapon in their arsenal. Daniels slipped the copies into a hidden compartment in the evidence room, a narrow slot behind a loose panel he'd discovered months ago during a late-night search. For a missing report, it wasn't much, but it was enough to keep their insurance safe. With the originals tucked under Harris' arm, they made their way to the conference room, the air growing heavier with each step. The precinct hummed with its usual chaos phones ringing, voices overlapping, but beneath it all was a tension that prickled at Daniel's skin, a sense that something monumental was about to unfold. The conference room was already packed when they arrived, a sea of uniformed officers milling about, their murmurs buzzing like static. The air was thick, almost suffocating, charged with unease that no one dared name. Chief Larson stood at the front, his broad shoulders squared, his presence as commanding as ever. But Daniels noticed the strain in his posture, the faint tightness around his mouth, the way his hands clenched briefly before relaxing. "Glad you could join us," Larson said as they entered, his voice clipped, his gray eyes locking onto them with an intensity that felt like a challenge. "We've got a situation. Mitchell's network runs deeper than we thought. We've identified new targets, and I'll need everyone on this." Harris and Daniels exchanged a glance, their suspicion hardening into certainty. The chief's words were too polished, too rehearsed. Before he could continue, Harris stepped forward, her boots echoing against the polished floor. "Before we go any further," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a whip, "there's something we need to address." Larson raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Is that so?" he replied, his tone deceptively mild, without a word. Harris set the thick envelope on the table, her gaze never wavering from his. "We've uncovered evidence," she said, her voice steady as steel, "that ties you directly to Mitchell's operation. Bank transfers, emails, everything." The room fell silent, the weight of her words crashing over it like a wave. Every pair of eyes turned to Larson, who stood motionless, his expression unreadable. But Daniels saw a fleeting glint in his eyes, a crack in the mask. Fear, maybe, or the cold realization of a cornered man. "That's a bold claim, Captain," Larson said slowly, his voice low and deliberate. "I hope you've got more than wild theories to back it up." Harris didn't flinch. She tore open the envelope, pulling out the damning papers and sliding them across the table to his senior officer, a grizzled veteran named Carter who'd always stayed loyal to Larson. "These don't lie," she said, her words sharp and unyielding. Larson's gaze flicked to the documents, his jaw tightening as he scanned the lines of betrayal written in his own hand. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice dropping to a near growl. "You have no idea what you're stepping into." Daniels took a step forward, his own anger flaring. "We know enough," he shot back, his tone firm, unwavering. "And we're not stopping until every last one of you answers for this." For a moment, the room seemed to teeter on the edge of something explosive, the air crackling with unspoken threats. Then Larson straightened, a chilling calm settling over him. "You're playing a dangerous game," he said, his voice smooth as ice, sending a shiver down Daniel's spine. Before anyone could react, the door burst open with a force that rattled the walls. Two internal affairs officers stormed in, their badges glinting under the fluorescent lights. Chief Larson, one of them barked, his tone clipped and authoritative. "You're under investigation for corruption and conspiracy. Come with us." The room erupted into House officers whispering, shifting uncomfortably, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. Larson didn't resist as the cuffs clicked around his wrists, but his eyes stayed fixed on Harris and Daniels, a promise of retribution burning in their depths. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the clamor as they led him away. Harris watched him go, her face a mask of resolve, though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. She'd won this round, but the victory tasted bitter hollow. Daniels exhaled, the enormity of what they'd done settling over him like a shroud. "We did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile triumph. Harris nodded, her eyes distant. "For now, but there's still so much left to do." As the room began to empty, they returned to the evidence room, their steps heavy with purpose. They'd struck a blow against the corruption festering within their ranks, but deep down, they both knew this was only the beginning. Justice demanded more and more sleepless nights, more risks, more battles against the shadows that thrived on power. The next morning, the precinct buzzed with a restless energy, a cocktail of shock and grim determination rippling through the halls. Larson's arrest had sent tremors through the department, shattering the illusion of invincibility that had cloaked him for years. In the break room, Daniels found a cluster of officers huddled around the flickering TV, the news blaring with a headline that screamed betrayal, police chief accused of corruption. In major crime syndicate bust, Larson's face filled the screen, stern and unyielding, a stark contrast to the man they'd seen led away in cuffs. "Unbelievable," muttered Officer Torres, a weary man with a quick temper and a quicker laugh, his voice thick with disbelief. The chief of all people. Beside him, Officer Nguyen shook her head, her dark hair falling into her eyes. "Makes you wonder who else is dirty," she said, her tone laced with a quiet anger that Daniels recognized all too well. He grabbed a styrofoam cup and poured himself some coffee, the bitter aroma grounding him as he ignored the sidelong glances from his colleagues. Trust was a fragile thing here, and Daniels knew his own past string of reckless choices and a reprimand that still stung had left him on shaky ground. Earning their respect back would be a slow climb, but he'd face it head on, just as he had last night. As he turned to leave, he nearly collided with Harris, who strode in with a stack of case files clutched under her arm. "Morning," she said, her voice brisk, already shifting into the relentless rhythm of the day. "We've got work to do." Daniels fell into step beside her, taking the file she handed him. "With Larson out, we need to dismantle the rest of Mitchell's network," she continued, her words clipped but purposeful. "Internal affairs is tearing through the department, but we've still got leads to chase." Back in the evidence room, the recovered files from Blake's laptop glowed on the monitor, a digital map of deceit. Harris pointed to a cluster of encrypted emails, her finger hovering over the screen. "These mention a meeting tonight," she said, her voice low with anticipation. "It's at a private club downtown Mitchell's old haunt." Daniels frowned, leaning closer. "Another big player?" he asked, his mind already racing. Harris nodded, her eyes narrowing. "Most likely. If we can crash this meeting, we might flip some and get more names, more threads to pull." By evening, they were parked outside the club in an unmarked car, dressed in civilian clothes that felt foreign against their skin. The neighborhood was polished and upscale, its gleaming facades hiding the rot beneath a perfect stage for the powerful to play their games. A sleek black SUV rolled up, its tinted windows reflecting the streetlights like dark mirrors. A tall man emerged, his tailored suit cutting a sharp silhouette against the night. Harris tensed beside Daniels, her breath catching. "That's Ethan Grayson," she whispered, her voice tight with recognition. "Real estate mogul. He's dodged money laundering charges before, slippery as hell." Daniel's eyes narrowed as Grayson strode toward the club, exuding a confidence that bordered on arrogance. "Looks like our next target," he said, his voice hardening with purpose. They slipped out of the car, trailing him at a distance, the soft jazz drifting from the club's interior wrapping around them like a deceptive lullaby. Inside, the air was dim and heavy with sophistication. a veneer of elegance masking the deals being brokered in the shadows. For Harris and Daniels, every step deeper into this world was a step closer to justicing, a stark reminder of the cost of unchecked power. The dimly lit club buzzed with the low hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses, a haze of cigarette smoke curling through the air. From their vantage point near the entrance, Harris and Daniels caught sight of Grayson weaving through the crowd, his broad shoulders cutting a path toward a private room, tucked away in the shadowy recesses of the establishment. Harris tilted her head subtly, her sharp eyes narrowing as she assessed the situation. Over there, she murmured, nodding toward a small, weathered table near the bar. We'll sit there. It's close enough to watch him without sticking out like sore thumbs. Daniels gave a faint nod, his jaw tight with anticipation, and followed her lead. They settled into the creaky wooden chairs, ordering a couple of drinks, whiskey for him, gin for her to blend into the scene. Every nerve in their bodies thrummed with alertness as they waited, their gazes flickering toward that back room like hawks tracking prey. Minutes dragged by, each one heavy with tension, until the atmosphere shifted. A stranger slipped through the club's entrance, a weary man with a pinched face and a nervous gait. Harris didn't recognize. He disappeared into the same private room Grayson had entered. Her fingers tightened around her glass, the cold bite of it grounding her racing thoughts. I'll get closer, Daniels said abruptly, pushing to his feet with a restless energy. See if I can pick up anything. Harris shot him a quick, approving glance. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Be careful, she whispered, staying rooted to her seat to preserve their fragile cover. Daniels moved through the club with practiced ease, his steps casual but deliberate, his phone clutched in one hand as a prop. He drifted past the private room, noting the door was cracked open just enough to let slivers of muffled voices spill out. He slowed his pace, tilting his head as if distracted by his screen, straining to catch the fragmented words. Everything set for the transfer, a gruff voice declared, laced with confidence. Another, sharper voice cut in, Mitchell's gone. We've got no choice but to switch contacts. A third chimed in, tinged with frustration. Lon was supposed to handle this. Now we're wide open. Daniel's pulse hammered in his chest, adrenaline flooding his veins. They were scrambling, piecing together a new plan after the recent wave of arrests had torn their operation apart. He edged closer, his breath shallow, desperate to glean more. The door suddenly swung wide, and Grayson emerged, his imposing frame nearly colliding with Daniel's. The air between them crackled with suspicion as Grayson's cold, calculating eyes locked onto him. Can I help you? He asked, his voice low and edged with menace. Daniel's mind raced, but he forced a sheepish grin, holding up his phone. Sorry, man, just trying to find the restroom. Got turned around. Grayson studied him for a long, agonizing moment, his gaze piercing through the dim light, before jerking his chin toward the hallway. That way. He grunted. Daniels muttered a quick thanks and sauntered off, his heart pounding against his ribs. When he slid back into his seat beside Harris, her expression was taut with worry. Grayson made me, he admitted under his breath, but they're definitely cooking up something big. Talked about a transfer and needing a new contact since Larson's out. Harris' eyes darkened with resolve. We can't let this slip through our fingers. Let's move before they catch on. They slipped out of the club, the cool night air hitting their flushed faces as they hurried back to the precinct. The briefing room buzzed with urgency as they relayed every detail to the team. Harris paced, her voice steady but fierce. This transfer's our shot to dismantle their whole network. We need to hit it hard and fast. The next few hours blurred into a storm of activity. Warrants were rushed through. A task force assembled, and intel pinpointed the transfer city, an abandoned warehouse on the city's fringes, its rusted walls looming like a fortress under the moonless sky. As they rolled up to the location, Harris and Daniels took point, leading the team in a meticulously planned raid. The air hung thick with unspoken fear and determination as they breached the building, weapons drawn, boots echoing on the cracked concrete. Inside, chaos awaited. Grayson and his crew stood amid stacks of Kratz piles of cash and contraband glinting under flickering fluorescent lights. Atlanta PD, hands in the air, Harris bellowed, her voice slicing through the din. Panic erupted as the suspects scattered like roaches, but the officers moved with ruthless precision, cuffing them one by one. Grayson's cool facade shattered, replaced by a wild, desperate fury as they slapped the restraints on him. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You have no idea who you're crossing." Harris and Daniels exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of the weight behind his threat. They'd heard that bravado before, and it only fueled their resolve. As the team secured the scene, Daniels' sharp eyes landed on a locked briefcase perched atop a crate. His fingers trembled slightly as he pried it open, revealing a trove of documents and a battered burner phone. Harris snatched the device, scrolling through its messages with a growing sense of dread. "What have we got?" Daniels asked, peering over her shoulder. She handed it to him, her face grim. "A direct line to someone higher up, Simeon, we haven't touched yet." Daniels skimmed the texts, his stomach twisting into knots. The operation they'd just busted was merely a thread in a much larger web, and the unseen puppet master was still out there, watching their every move. "We took down Mitchell and Larson," Harris said softly, her voice heavy with realization. "But the real power's still pulling the strings." Daniels nodded, the enormity of their fight settling over him like a suffocating shroud. Justice felt tantalizingly close, yet maddeningly out of reach. That night, the precinct was eerily still, the kind of hush that follows a storm. Harris and Daniels sat alone in the evidence room, surrounded by stacks of seized files and gadgets. The burner phone rested between them, its dark screen flickering with intermittent notifications. Daniels broke the silence, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Whoever this is," he said, gesturing to the phone, "they're smart. They've let everyone else take the fall while they stay untouchable." Harris stared at the device, her mind churning. "They've been orchestrating this from the shadows, watching us, manipulating every move. But now we've got a crack in their armor." She tapped the phone, its screen flaring to life. The latest message, sent just before the raid, read, "Is the transfer secure? No mistakes." Daniels frowned, piecing it together. They thought it'd all go off without a hitch. Grayson's silence is going to tip them off. Harris leaned back, her mind racing. "Then we turn that against them." Daniels raised an eyebrow. Intrigued. "You mean we reply?" She nodded, a spark of determination igniting in her eyes. "We bait them. If they think the operation's still alive, they'll reach out to their next trusted link. We trace it, and we've got them." Daniels hesitated, doubt flickering across his face. "If we're sloppy, they'll smell the trap a mile away." Her gaze met his, unyielding. "It's a gamble, but we're running out of time. This could be our only shot before they vanish for good." After a beat, he relented. "All right, let's play their game." They huddled over the phone, crafting a response with surgical precision vague enough to dodge suspicion, compelling enough to keep the line alive. Harris typed, "Transfer delayed. Security issues. We'll update soon." She exhaled sharply and hit send, the message vanishing into the ether. The wait that followed was agonizing, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension coiling in their chests. Then the phone vibrated, a new message flashing across the screen. "Understood. Meet at the usual place, midnight. Come alone." Daniel's heart leapt. "They're biting." Harris was already on her feet, barking orders into her radio. "Tech team, trace this number now. Get a surveillance unit ready, we're moving tonight." The text worked at lightning speed, cross-referencing the number until it spat out a location, a ritzy downtown hotel, its reputation built on discretion and the secrets of its elite guests. "This isn't some street-level thug," Daniels muttered, scanning the details. "We're stepping into the big leagues." By 11:30 p.m., they were in position, a small team of undercover officers fanning out around the hotel's gleaming exterior. The lobby sparkled, with opulence marble floors reflecting the warm glow of chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of expensive cologne. Harris and Daniels slipped inside, blending into the late-night crowd with the ease of seasoned operatives. They claimed a spot at the bar, their eyes locked on the elevators. At the stroke of midnight, a tall man in a tailored suit stepped out, his presence radiating authority. Harris' breath caught. "That's him," she whispered. Daniels nudged her, his voice barely audible. "Let's see where he leads us." The man strode toward a private lounge, flashing a keycard to slip inside. Harris signaled the tech team through her comms. "We've got him. Track his movements and monitor every call he makes inside that lounge." The game was shifting, and with it, the fragile balance of justice and power. For every step they took, the consequences of corruption loomed larger. A stark reminder that true accountability was a battle fought in the shadows, one they couldn't afford to lose. In the dim, smoky haze of the upscale lounge, Daniel sat hunched over a corner table, his broad shoulders pressed firmly against the wall, a habit born from years of needing to see every angle of a room. His sharp eyes flicked toward the entrance as he slipped a sleek, unfamiliar phone from his jacket, not the cheap burner he usually carried, but something more sophisticated, its weight a quiet reminder of the stakes at hand. His fingers danced across the screen, typing a message with deliberate precision. "We need to get closer." Across from him, Harris, her posture rigid with barely contained urgency, tracked his every move. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, accentuating the hard lines of her face, etched deeper by sleepless nights and unrelenting resolve. She leaned in slightly, her voice low and edged with impatience. "He's too comfortable over there. We're still in the dark." Daniel's gaze shifted, catching sight of a server weaving through the crowd, balancing a tray of glistening drinks that reflected the lounge's muted golden lights. The clink of glass and the hum of casual chatter filled the air, a stark contrast to the tension coiling in his chest. An idea sparked behind his steady hazel eyes. "I've got something," he muttered, rising smoothly from his seat. Harris quirked an eyebrow but said nothing as he melted into the throng of patrons, his movements fluid, purposeful. Minutes later, he reemerged, transformed. The crisp white shirt and black vest of a hotel staff member clung to his frame, a tray identical to the server's balanced expertly in his hands. Harris's lips twitched into a rare smirk, her skepticism giving way to amusement. "Didn't peg you for the undercover type, Daniel. You clean up nice." He shrugged, adjusting the tray with a faint grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Beneath the casual reply, his mind churned. Every second spent in the charade was a gamble. But the man they were after was no ordinary mark. With a steadying breath, Daniel glided into the lounge, weaving between tables adorned with half-empty glasses and flickering candles. The target sat alone, his tailored suit pristine, his attention glued to the glowing screen of his phone. Up close, the man's presence was unsettling. His calm was too deliberate, his focus too absolute. Daniel's heart thudded against his ribs, but his hands remained steady as he approached. He tilted the tray just so, a subtle motion that activated a tiny scanning device concealed beneath his sleeve. "Your drink." "Sir," he said, his voice smooth as he set a glass down with a soft clink. The man barely glanced up, offering only a curt nod, his fingers still tapping away. Daniel retreated, his pulse a quiet drumbeat in his ears, every step measured until he slid back into the shadows beside Harris. "Got it," he said, slipping the device into her waiting hand. Her fingers brushed his, cool and steady, as she plugged it into a portable monitor. The screen flared to life, revealing a cascade of the man's recent messages. Harris's eyes narrowed, zeroing in on one that stood out like a flare in the night, confirming transfer location. "Stand by for further instructions." Her breath hitched, a rare crack in her composure. "He's coordinating something massive," she whispered, the weight of realization settling over her like a storm cloud. "We need to move. Now." Within minutes, the team descended. Officers flanked the man, their movements swift and silent, escorting him from the lounge to a sterile, steel-walled interrogation room buried deep within the precinct. He didn't resist, didn't even flinch. His calm was a blade, sharp and unyielding. Inside, Harris and Daniel faced him across a scuffed metal table, the air thick with tension. Harris's voice cut through it like ice. "We know you're tied to Mitchell's network. We know you've been running the show since Larson went down. It's over." The man Victor Lanning, they'd later learn, tilted his head, a faint smile curling his lips. It wasn't defiance. It was something colder, more assured. "You think cuffing me ends this? You're playing checkers, my friends, while the game's already moved to chess." Daniel leaned forward, his broad frame casting a shadow across the table. His voice low and pressing. "Then why don't you enlighten us, Victor? Who's really pulling the strings?" The smile widened, a glint of triumph flashing in Victor's pale eyes. "You'll never find them. They're too clever, too powerful, and while you're here chasing ghosts, the real plan's already rolling." Harris's patience snapped. She slammed a thick folder onto the table, its contents spilling out grainy photos. Stacks of financial records, transcripts of encrypted chatter. "We've got enough to bury you for life," she said, her tone frigid. "But you can dig yourself out a little. Give us a name." Victor leaned back, unruffled, his gaze drifting to the ceiling as if savoring some private victory. "You're too late," he said simply, the words dripping with finality. Before either of them could press further, the door burst open, hinges groaning under the force. A young officer stumbled in, his face drained of color, clutching a tablet like it was a lifeline. "Captain Harris," he stammered, thrusting it toward her. "You need to see this." Her fingers tightened around the device as she scanned the screen, her eyes widening with every word. A coordinated cyber attack was unfurling across the city power grids, flickering out. Financial systems hemorrhaging funds, emergency services crippled by cascading failures. "It's happening now," the officer said, his voice trembling, "and it's tied to him." Daniel whirled on Victor, his voice a razor's edge. "How do we stop it?" The man's smile finally faded, replaced by a stare as cold and unyielding as stone. "You don't," he said, each syllable a quiet taunt. Harris and Daniel exchanged a look grim, resolute, electric with the weight of what lay ahead. This wasn't just about dismantling a criminal web anymore. It was about saving a city teetering on the brink. The precinct erupted into chaos. Officers scrambled, their boots pounding against the tile as shouts ricocheted off the walls. Screens flickered with live feeds of the attack, blackouts rolling across neighborhoods. Traffic lights flashing erratically, bank accounts bleeding dry. Daniel's jaw tightened as he watched, his mind racing. "This is a full-scale assault," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Harris nodded, her scowl deepening, determination blazing in her dark eyes. "We've got to move fast." Lisa, the precinct's tech specialist, burst through the crowd, her arms laden with gear, her round face flushed with urgency. "Captain, we've traced the attack's source," she said, breathless. "A server farm just outside the city. High security setup, but the connections are clear as day." Harris seized the data, her mind already spinning through options. "How long before this becomes irreversible?" Lisa hesitated, her fingers twitching nervously. "An hour, maybe less. If we shut it down soon, we can limit the damage, but every second counts." Daniel edged closer, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "What's the play?" Harris shook her head, her thoughts racing. "A full breach is too risky. If they sense us coming, they'll torch everything and vanish. We need stealth." The chief of internal affairs, a weary man with graying hair and a permanent frown, stepped forward, his authority temporary but absolute after Larson's fall. "I'm green-lighting an elite team," he said, his tone clipped. "Harris, Danielle, you're in charge. Take who you need." The strike team came together in a blurred operatives, each handpicked for their grit and skill. Harris and Daniel suited up, strapping on vests and holsters, their faces carved from stone as they pored over the server farm's layout. It was a fortress, towering walls, armed patrols, layers of digital and physical defenses designed to keep secrets locked tight. "South entrance," Harris said, tapping the blueprint. "Lisa will guide us remotely, disabling security as we go. We hit the main server room. Secure the data and get out before they can wipe it." Their convoy sliced through the city's darkened streets, headlights cutting through the night like blades. The air inside the van buzzed with tension, every breath shallow, every glance charged. The facility loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the starless sky, a monolith of steel and glass radiating quiet menace. Lisa's voice crackled through their earpieces, steady but urgent. "I'm in. Perimeter sensors are down. You're clear to move." Harris gave the signal, and the team spilled out, shadows among shadows, weapons drawn, senses razor-sharp. Inside, the facility was a Tom's Lent save for the low, relentless hum of servers stretching into the distance. They navigated a labyrinth of corridors, guided by Lisa's precise directions. Her voice a lifeline in the dark. "Main server rooms ahead," she said. To guards outside, Daniel took point with another officer, a weary veteran named Torres, whose quick hands made short work of the guard slit, efficient, no wasted motion. Harris led the charge into the server room, where rows of machines pulsed with cold, mechanical life. "We're in, Lisa," Harris reported, her voice taut. "Get us those servers." From her station at the precinct, Lisa's fingers flew across her keyboard, bypassing firewalls with a speed born of desperation. "Downloading now." 2 minutes. Then, disastrous alarm shrieked, bathing the room in crimson light. "They've spotted us," Harris snapped. "Lisa, how long?" 60 seconds, came the reply, strained but focused. "Hold them off." The team braced as security forces stormed in, boots thundering, guns blazing. The air exploded with gunfire, sharp cracks reverberating off the walls. Harris and Daniel moved as one, ducking behind server racks, their shots precise and unrelenting. 30 seconds, Lisa shouted. Daniel fired back at a guard closing in, his breath ragged. "We're cutting it close." "Almost there, I got it." Lisa's voice broke through the chaos. "Data's secure." Harris nodded sharply. "Time to go." Daniel covered their retreat, the team slipping out as the facility's defenses faltered, the city's fate hanging by a thread. In the aftermath, the lesson burned clear. Justice wasn't just about catching the guilty, it was about facing the consequences of power unchecked. Victor's smug certainty, the chief's reluctant command. Lisa's quiet heroismal threads in a tapestry of accountability. For Harris and Daniel, every move had been a stand against chaos, a reminder that power, when abused, didn't just corrupt, it consumed. The team clawed their way through the suffocating corridors of the facility, every step a testament to their grit and resolve. Sweat stung their eyes, and their muscles screamed with exhaustion, but they pressed forward, a tightly knit unit moving with the precision of a well-oiled machine. The enemy was relentless. Boots thundered against the cold concrete behind them. Shouts echoed off the sterile walls, and the air crackled with tension. Yet, amid the chaos, their discipline held firm, each member anticipating the other's moves as if bound by an unspoken rhythm. They weren't just fighting to survive, they were fighting for something bigger, something that gnawed at their consciences and fueled their every breath. When they finally burst through the heavy steel doors into the crisp night air, freedom tasted bittersweet. The sky stretched wide and dark above them, speckled with stars that seemed indifferent to their struggle. Their lungs burned as they stumbled into the shadows, collapsing briefly against the rough bark of nearby trees to catch their ragged breaths. In the distance, the facility's alarms shrieked into the stillness, a piercing wail that carried the weight of their escape. Lisa, her hands trembling slightly from adrenaline, clutched the precious drive to her chest. Her voice was steady, but laced with urgency as she turned to the others. "I've confirmed if data's all here." Her hazel eyes flickered with a mix of relief and dread, knowing the Pandora's box they'd just pried open. Harris, his jaw tight and his dark hair plastered with sweat, nodded as he slid into the driver's seat of their battered getaway van. "Everything's on there," he said, his tone gravelly with exhaustion but edged with grim satisfaction. "Transaction logs, encrypted communications, names every last one of them. It's worse than we ever imagined. This isn't just a local racket, it's a sprawling web stretching across cities, with threads tied to people in the highest seats of power." His knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel, the reality sinking in like a stone in his gut. As the engine roared to life and they peeled away from the chaos, the flickering lights of the facility faded into the rearview mirror, but the weight of their discovery clung to them like damp clothes. Daniels, seated in the back, leaned his head against the cool window, his breath fogging the glass in slow, deliberate clouds. He was the quiet one, the thinker, his broad shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible burden. "We've got them now," he murmured, almost to himself, his voice a low rumble that barely rose above the hum of the tires. His mind churned with the implication spalization with polished smiles. Executives in tailored suits, even fellow officers he'd once trusted. The betrayal stung, sharp and personal, but beneath it simmered a quiet resolve. Justice, he thought, was a slow blade, but it cut deep. Back at the precinct, the air buzzed with a frenetic energy as the team pored over the data. The operations room was a hive of activity. Computers hummed, papers rustled, and voices overlapped in a symphony of determination. Analysts hunched over screens, their faces illuminated by the cold blue glow, piecing together a report that grew more damning with every line. The scale of the corruption was staggering, a grotesque tapestry woven from greed and abuse of power. Names flashed across the monitor: senators, CEOs, even a deputy chief from a neighboring agency, one a pillar of society, now revealed as a rotting beam. Internal affairs didn't waste a second. Arrest warrants flew out like arrows, and the network began to crumble, brick by corrupt brick. Word of the takedown rippled through the city like a shockwave. By morning, the streets hummed with whispers and outrage, a reckoning unfolding under the gray March sky. Harris and Daniels stood shoulder to shoulder in the operations room, their weary eyes fixed on the flurry of activity around them. The team moved with a tireless rhythm. Phones rang, files slammed onto desks, and officers darted out to haul in the guilty. Daniels broke the silence, his voice soft but heavy with meaning. "We did it. It's over." His words hung in the air, fragile against the enormity of what they'd achieved. Harris shook her head, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Not yet," she countered, her gaze distant as she traced the cracks in the ceiling with her eyes. "There's cleanup left to do, loose ends to tie, systems to purge. We've ripped out the roots, but we've got to make damn sure this poison doesn't creep back." Her voice carried a fierce edge, tempered by a bone-deep weariness. She'd seen too much, fought too hard, to let complacency undo their victory. Daniels nodded, his expression softening with understanding. "One step at a time," he said, a faint smile tugging at his weathered face. It was a mantra, a promise to keep going, no matter how long the road ahead stretched. As the night wore on, the city began to heal from the chaos. Power flickered back to life in darkened neighborhoods, casting warm light through windows once shrouded in shadow. Financial systems, teetering on the edge of collapse, stabilized under the careful hands of emergency crews. Sirens wailed less frequently as ambulances and fire trucks regained their footing, weaving through streets that had held their breath in fear. The worst had passed, a storm weathered by the relentless spirit of Harris, Daniels, and their unshakable team. But even as the crisis ebbed, a quiet tension lingered in their bones. Outside the precinct, as the first rays of dawn painted the horizon in hues of gold and pink, they stepped into the cool morning air. The city sprawled before them, bruised but breathing, a testament to their sacrifice. Harris tilted her head back, letting the light wash over her face, and for a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight lift just a little. Daniels stood beside her, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his breath visible in the chill. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. The silence between them was thick with unspoken gratitude, a bond forged in the crucible of their fight. They knew the truth. Thoth's battle for justice was an endless war, a flame that demanded constant tending. The corruption they'd uprooted was a symptom of a deeper sickness, one born from the arrogance of unchecked power. It was a lesson etched into their souls. Those who wield authority without accountability sow chaos, and the innocent pay the price. Yet, in that fleeting moment of triumph, they savored the quiet victory. They had stared into the abyss, confronted the monsters lurking within, and emerged not just intact, but stronger, together. Whatever lay ahead, be it new threats or old ghosts, they were ready. For now, the dawn was theirs, a fragile promise of hope earned through blood and resolve.